Here we are. I'm going to make a comparison. One is Japan's throwaway children, right? And the other one is Japan's stalking crisis. And the difference is that the stalking crisis is going to be it's going to be to demonize men. Even though stalking is done by both genders, it's going to be a threat narrative to take away men's rights. Whereas the throwaway children, guess what? Most of the abuse is going to be by mothers. And of course, there is not going to be some kind of threat narrative to do something against women and mothers. It's often going to be talked about gender neutral wise, like parents.
Daichi, and he has been here for several years. To protect him, we've disguised his identity and voice.
You wake up where it isn't your home. People who aren't your parents take care of you, and you start and end your day here. Kids aren't here for the same reasons. Some of their parents visit. Others have parents who've died. You must be careful around them. You can't upset them.
Origami is the one thing that gives Daichi comfort.
Often I'd be at home by myself, but I'd be making something awesome. Spending a long time using what I'd find in the house, putting intricate pieces together. I liked it from when I was little.
Growing up, Daichi was abused by his mother. He was left without food and badly beaten.
There you go. He was abused by his mother, right? Typical.
A school teacher saw his injuries and reported it to authorities. At first, Daichi was sent to a special institution for kids in crisis. But he didn't like it because he wasn't able to go to school.
There were kids my age. We had nothing to do.
As you can see, he's being set up to fail because to take care of him and get away from his abusive mother, they have to put him in an institution that he's, education is everything to Japan, right? So he's automatically put on lead shoes in the lake.
In such a small place. We weren't able to get out. Everyone was stressed. They fight over small things. Every day was boring. I felt thankful when I found ways to kill time. It was like that for a year, and then 2 years.
Daichi says it's better where he is now. He lives in a small unit with 6 other kids, and a staff member prepares their meals. But he'd rather live with his mother.
I feel this way partly because of how people look at you. You're in an institution. When I'm growing up, I should be with my mother. That's what family is about. Yes, there was abuse and violence, but my relationship with her will only get worse and awkward if I stay here. Staff aren't my parents. They're here because it's their job. I felt free and less burdened at home.
This guy would rather be with an abusive mother than deal with this. So there's one young guy trying to get by, and he's set up to fail. Let's see the next guy.
Many who leave institutions end up at the bottom of Japan's social pyramid. Some struggle with poverty. This 27-year-old, who we'll call Kenji, lives in a homeless shelter on the fringe of Tokyo.
Okay, it's another young man. When are we going to get to a girl?
As a young boy, he went from institution to institution while his mother battled cancer. Kenji barely remembers her and says he didn't even feel sad when she died, while he was still a teenager.
What was being in these institutions like?
見てもらいたいっていうのはありますね。
When children start living like that for a long period of time in institutions, they start to think they were thrown away by their parents. You want the staff to look after you like your parents would, but there's 13 to 15 kids for each staff member.
As an adult, Kenji has struggled. He's been in trouble with the police and loan sharks. He also hasn't been able to keep an apartment or hold down a job.
働く場所が工場が
My first workplace was a factory plant in the city, and my boss said it was right outside the station. I'd never seen so many buildings. They all looked the same. I didn't know how to call, had no sense of geography or where a police station would be. All I knew was I'd be fired.
This is the thing. They want these guys to be productive members of society, but they're not going to look after them in any way. My God.
Kenji went back to his institution for help, but there was nothing that could be done for him. He spent 3 years homeless on the streets of Tokyo, sleeping rough.
ここで寝てた？
ここで普通に
Yes, I used to walk around at night looking for places with a roof.
寝てる時に
I would sleep anywhere I could find if it wasn't raining or snowing. People thought I was filthy because I'd go around rummaging for rubbish.
まだじゃあ無意識にもう冷蔵庫の中
Staff at the homeless shelter where he now lives believe Kenji has a panic disorder, brought on by the trauma of being institutionalized as a child. He was shifted from one centre to another and never learnt to fend for himself.
監獄というかもうそういう
Sometimes being in the system felt like prison. Everything was controlled, the things you say and do. It's effective for them to decide everything from A to Z with strange rules. No talking about your past or family visits. Girls and boys couldn't talk to each other, so I became introverted.
Yeah, girls and boys couldn't talk to one another. So when Al Jazeera here, you know, the Middle East, starts demonizing men in the other video, talking about stalking, here's a case where a young guy can't even interact with girls. So how's he supposed to know what they think? What's it like to be with them? Right? So this is a heroic young man, by the way. He's set up to fail. He has the society has discarded him, really, and he has the complete right not to consider his society at all. Yet here he is, a harmless person who's just trying to get by. And guess what? He's going to be demonized when these, you know, in the other video, they're demonizing men as stalkers. So he's low status. Women hate low status men. He just has to be around a woman and she's going to be able to just call up the police and say, this guy's stalking me when he's just trying to get by in life. So this is why it is so unjust.
I acted quiet and harmless because in the beginning, I think I was frightened.
After 4 years at the homeless shelter, Kenji seems to be finding his feet. Every day he repays the staff's generosity by delivering bento lunchboxes to the needy.
There you go. Like, this is a heroic young man. He's pulled himself up by his bootstrap in spite of everything being turned against him. Everything stacked against him. And yet this young man is going to be demonized eventually, one way or another. And you know something? He will still be considered a bum because he's still low status. To me, this guy is number one. He's on top of the world. He is grade A humanity. And I'm telling you now, he is the type of guy who will be thrown in jail at any time. I mean, what they say earlier, he got in trouble with the loan sharks, right? Because he's so desperate. He'll go for anywhere for money. He's probably needed to eat. He was probably starving to death. Here's the next person, another young man. Okay, 3 in a row. I've walked different paths.
とは違う道を歩んできた一人を人一倍強く感じてきた頼るべき対象もないまま今まで
No one
生
else
きて
to rely on. I don't know if I can listen too much more of the song because I could start cracking up at any time.
きた
Musician Takayuki Watai knows how hard it is to survive after growing up in an institution. Without family ties in Japan, it's hard to go to university, get a job, or even get an apartment in this conservative country.
劣等感です。
Hold it. I'm not going to let them get away with this. This has nothing to do really with being conservative. Even a liberal country is going to do this to him because let me tell you, people do not care about men. They don't care about boys. And this is another heroic young man, by the way, who's going to pull himself up by his bootstraps without society's help.
There's an intense sense of inferiority. You're a minority against the majority. There is an image that children from institutions are disabled. Criminal kids go there. The elderly think it's an orphanage.
When Takayuki was a child, his mother neglected him. From the age of 6, he grew up in an institution.
Again, his mother neglected him. Right. Oh my God. You see this pattern. And of course, no matter how many times they say this, there's not going to be any legal legislation, curbing women's rights because they abuse children. Remember, the men of Japan work all day. So if someone's going to abuse the child, it's almost always going to be the mother. They're not going to demonize them like they do the men.
当時は僕はそのネグレクトを受けているという感覚もあって。
I did not get any sense that I mattered to my mother.
大人になってから。
After I got
Of
into
course, again, this is a heroic young man. The stalking video, they're going to demonize men. This young man is not stalking anybody. He just wants to get by and live his life. And guess what happens if they start putting these cramping down on the stalkers, right? No women stalkers, by the way. You know what's going to happen. Guys like him are just who's trying to get by, who has everything stacked against him, is going to have another brick laid on top. By the way, Annette, this is why we don't demonize the whole of entire sex. This is the top comment by Peppa, what are you doing on my YouTube account? That's funny. He says, I used to be one of the Japan's throwaway children. When I was 5, my mother threw me in a trash bag. Again, my mother was dating a mean man. You know why? Because the man takes care of his mother. His mother has to take care of the boy. That's why she's with that guy. She doesn't care about her son. Okay. My neighbors one day saw my mother beating me up in front of our house and called the police. And I was taken away from my mother. And I remember kicking and screaming when they took me away. Okay. Now you can read the whole comment from yourself. But I just want to say, okay, when I was 10, I was introduced to a single mother who said she wanted to adopt me, but I didn't want to be adopted because I considered that place as home. A month later, my brother died from an unexpected heart attack. His brother was only 2, by the way. After his death, I started to open up to that woman that wanted to adopt me. She was 23. She was very kind and beautiful. Finally, I was adopted by her, and she did her best to take care of me. She told me that she lived in an institution as a kid and wanted to help a child like her when she grew up. Now in college, I look back and realize just how lucky I was to have someone like her as my mother. And so this is why you don't demonize entire sex. Because we could turn around and say, most of the child abuse is done by women. And we could clamp down and make all these rules and laws. And maybe there's something should be added. Like I would definitely make a law punishing women who murder their children and cry postpartum depression. That's the one thing I would add. And something, postpartum depression would disappear overnight. But that being said, a woman who went through the same thing had empathy for this young man and took care of him. And that's why you don't demonize an entire sex. Thank you. Now they are going to demonize men. This is the one, the Japan Stalking Crisis.
I'm Steve Chow. Japan is suffering a stalking crisis, with the number of reported cases growing tenfold in a decade. But the real number...
By the way, it's growing tenfold. It's not simply a case where they said, men are stalking women and we've had enough. No, it's like it's increased according to them tenfold. Why? Because what that video I showed you, these young guys, everything's stacked against them. And so I think the mental stability of men in Japan is just being eroded. That's why it's growing up. They don't want to deal with why. They just say that it's happening and something's got to be done. So typical.
The number of incidents is believed to be much higher, with a growing number leading to murder.
See, and there's the threat narrative. Not only is it higher, but it's probably higher than we even think, right?
Evan Williams traveled across Japan to meet those suffering in silence from stalking.
Oh, by the way, they're all going to be women. Even though women stalk men, they're going to be demonized for it.
Out of sight and in the shadows, an insidious crime is terrorizing women across Japan. Often it's committed by those closest to them.
There you go. It's women are in trouble, and it's going to be people that are closest to them, even though later on they show someone who wasn't close at all, didn't know her from Eve.
Men who believe that women belong to them, no matter what. Stalking is growing faster in Japan than any other nation, and in many cases, it's deadly.
I thought of my wife only as something I owned. I used to see her as my personal property.
Hiro is a stalker. When his marriage broke down, he refused to accept that his wife could leave.
It was absolutely unforgivable that something I owned would run away from me.
Okay, now this is what's so disgusting. They're going to use this guy and use him as a template for the average guy in the street. Those young men, those heroic young men that I showed in the earlier video, who they are going to suffer, and they're going to use this man as fodder to make legal, increase laws against men and curb their ability to move around. This is what's going to happen.
Several hours south of Tokyo, I meet a man living with the consequences of a stalking attack. Hiroyuki Onoi takes me to a spot where a stalker used to spy on his sister, Yukiko.
He would park the car here and watch the house. Sometimes he would be over on that street, on the other side of the park, watching. There were times when he parked right in front of the house, and he would call and tell her to come out.
The stalking was intense. Incessant phone calls, emails, and threats.
He would be roaming around the house watching, and when Yukako was about to go to work, he'd be waiting on the street.
Okay, they don't mention that this is an ex-partner of hers. So he's just a mentally ill guy. So, okay, why don't they just address the mental illness of Japan, the men of Japan? No, the problem is this guy, by the way, he's a sucker too, because when they start making these laws that clamp down on men, he's not going to be seen as one of the good guys. He's just another potential stalker to everybody. This is an ordinary, low-status man, and that's the way he's going to be deemed. So his freedoms are going to be curbed. And he's either going to be going, what, me? Or he's going to be saying, well, I have fewer rights, but it's all right because, my sister got damaged, and I hate other men, and this is why. Oh my God.
Yukiko's murder sparked outrage and led to the introduction of an anti-stalking law, but that was 15 years ago, and it's had little effect.
There you go. They've made an anti-stalking law, and guess what? You will not see it placed on women the way they will, but with men. And now men have to worry, right? Like if you're in a train car with a woman, she decides she doesn't like the look at your face, and you have to take that train car to work, and she goes to work the same way. She might turn around and call the police and say, this guy's stalking her. How are you going to get to work if you can't take the same train car? Right?
Japan has one of the world's worst gender equality ratings, and 1 in 3 women here has suffered from domestic violence.
There you go. This is a feminist narrative. And they talk about 1 in 4 here. They've gone up to 1 in 3. If 1 in 3 women were getting domestically abused, everyone would know about it. It would be common practice. And some women wouldn't get married. So this is a feminist narrative. And he's right about Japan being lowest in equality, because there's still housewives in Japan. In a country where salary men are dying from overwork. And by the way, Japan, does it have women-only train cars? Yes, it does. So this country is a typical female worshiping country. And it's keeping those low-life men away from women by presenting women with women-only train cars. So this narrative is automatically false. So they're also going to paint the police as these people who don't want to do their job and don't want to look after the poor girls.
Last year, police received a record 20,000 reports of stalking, a 10-fold increase in a decade.
A 10-fold increase in a decade. When was the law against stalking introduced? 15 years ago, right? So of course, within 5 years, women know they can just get a guy in trouble by calling up the police and saying he's stalking them. So of course there's 10-fold. Is that ever going to be mentioned in this in this documentary by Al Jazeera? The terrible Middle East, Al Jazeera, based out of Qatar. So we can now strike off the Middle East as being this anti-woman, portion of the world. It never was. Men and women are the same worldwide. Men worship the opposite sex, and they pander to them at the cost of men. That's how it works. Now, here are the heroes.
Instead of the police, Utto came here to a private security firm called the Police Old Boys. Run by former police officers, their main business is providing security for businessmen threatened by the Yakuza. Investigator Yoshihito Hamada followed Utto's stalker for 3 months to get all his personal details, then confronted the man.
Then I told him he had been stalking. I warned him immediately that if he continued, it would become a police matter. He became furious, and I gave him a warning. He said, "What are you? What are you?" He grabbed my chest and tried to punch me. He said, "I don't know you," and then he spat at me.
If this guy had anything on the man he's talking about, he would have just gone to the police. So this is just plain old harassment. And then this is what the future of the Japanese man is going to be. This guy, these guys are what it is. They probably do have it out for some girlfriend that dumped them. And maybe they hate their guts. But now they're going to have to deal with these white knights. No, so this is a fairly young man, but all the other guys were old guys. There's not much of a worse white knight than an old man. Okay, now we're going into the therapy sessions for men.
考えるわけ。ここでストーカー特に経験ある方は
Ms. Korihara says stalkers like these men believe they own the women they pursue and want to reclaim them.
奪還したいという言葉の裏には
Behind the word reclaim is the feeling that she is mine.
Can I say, you guys didn't see my necessarily my video talking about Mulan, but there's that song where the guys sing, they're going to war, their lives are in danger, it's brutal, and they sing, going to fight for a girl worth fighting for. You know, it's unspoken, but these men in Japan, they have nothing to look forward to. And the one thing they are supposedly given is this wonderful girl who's going to be there and support them when they've, dragged their asses back home from endless work. And so if Japan's going to promise that to them, then why wouldn't they think like that? I could cure these guys, no problem. I could show up and say, look, all these women you're going after, they don't give a shit if you live or die. And they're using you when you enter a relationship with them. So that's the way it is there.
And that's why they think they have the right to get her back. In Japan, there is a gender bias. It is a distorted notion of manhood and womanhood.
Ms. Korihara set up her therapy service for men to focus on the cause of the problem because she says so many female victims feel totally let down by how police respond to their complaints.
Yeah, the police didn't just go up and arrest this guy because my boyfriend was harassing me. I mean, of course they feel that way. Notice there's no women in here getting grilled by this woman.
The police response to stalking victims is still generally very poor. The victims come to us and say that police do not take them seriously. They don't do anything for them and only tell the victim and perpetrator to be nice to each other.
Yeah, you see, now they're demonizing the police because the police aren't just tack dogs for the average woman on the street.
I hear many cases like that.
Yeah, suppose there's no evidence. You just can't scoop a guy off the street and throw him in jail because some woman pointed a finger at them. And this is what they want.
The western city of Kyoto is known for its ancient temples and beautiful scenery. But it's also home to one of the most important centres of stalker study. We're visiting the city's main university to meet Japan's leading criminal psychologist on the issue. Every year, Ryoichi Hiroi deals with dozens of stalkers, often referred to him from the courts. He sees a growing silent crisis.
Stalking has become a serious social issue in Japan. Until now, stalker issues have been seen as quarrels between lovers or spouses, such as harassment that accompany divorce.
And you know something? He might be right, because it might have been that way. But things are changing, aren't they? Because the average guy has been given nothing. He's expected to just grind away and be given nothing in return.
However, there are more victims of stalkers who get killed. So the Japanese police are trying desperately to find out what to do.
A key part of his...
They are not going to address the issue of male abuse. That is society-wide.
Study has been to investigate the way the police and legal systems in other nations deal with stalking. He insists that locking up the most dangerous stalkers only makes them worse, and is now calling for the urgent adoption of a radical new approach to make clinical therapy a mandatory part of any criminal action.
Yeah, know what this therapy is going to be? It's going to be telling these guys, you know you expected to have that woman in your life? You cross that off your list. You get nothing. That's what it's going to be. You get nothing. But are these therapists in a society, Japanese society, if they're going to tell these guys that it's not worth going after? No, they're going to say, they're going to keep the narrative up. They're going to say, look, you're going to work your life to death. you're work yourself to death, and you need to get with this woman and be a good parent. You know, that's what they're going to. That's the narrative they're going to spin to get men keep going. So if these guys were honest, they would look at what's making men crazy and they would adjust. They're not going to do that.
Today, the campaign against stalking in Japan has a new celebrity recruit. Ikumi Yashimatsu is the first Japanese woman to win the Miss International beauty pageant. After she won, the most powerful man in Japan's entertainment industry demanded that she sign with him. He wanted a slice of the lucrative contracts her title brought her. One day, he turned up at a TV studio.
He grabbed my arm and tried to take.
Okay, enough of this. I can see what's going on here. This woman, she has fame as what, a beauty contestant, and so it's going to drift away eventually. So, like, this is no different than Ashley Judd over here or some of these other celebrities. They're at the top of the order in their society, and she's going to make a career out of demonizing men. This is what's going to happen. You know, this is what disgusts me to no end. No end.
Not only did they not protect me, they said, if you want to become famous, why don't you sign with him? I remember thinking that the Japanese police are more inclined to protect the perpetrators rather than the victims.
Of course, this is bullshit again. This is more jabbing at the police because they didn't just arrest this man, with trumped up charges. So this is more feminist rhetoric in a country where there's no, a feminist movement, at least nothing official. Because feminism is simply an outlet. It's simply, how do you put it? It's an outward appearance of what women actually want. So that's what's going on here.
Feeling intimidated and fearing for her life, Ikumi went to the courts seeking a restraining order. It took 8 months for them to finally say no.
Yeah, okay, they said no. So obviously they looked at the situation and said, this guy isn't really stalking you. This is pathetic. This is so typical. These women on top are going to she wants to keep her face in the popular sphere. And so becoming the face of this anti-male movement is going to be how she does it.
She then held a press conference about the continuous harassment and stalking and the lack of police action. She was
We don't have to go any further. Men in Japan are in trouble. They're in trouble right now, and it's only going to get worse. You understand? It's only going to get worse for them.
From thousands of women across Japan.
In the messages that I received, there were many personal stories from women getting stalked just like I was. Everyone was saying, they go to the police, but they don't protect us. No one protects us. You have to protect yourself.
There you go. So they have an anti-stalking law 15 years ago, and it doesn't work for them. What it is, these women have stories where they didn't like some guy. He's been around, maybe he was ogling her, and she went to the police and said, arrest this guy. And they said, sorry, we can't just arrest citizens on your say-so. So, I mean, this is what it is. So I'm telling you right now, I mean, if this doesn't, something doesn't happen, to curb this or stop this, men are in trouble, especially Japan. Japan is disgusting in its women worship. How dare they talk about this being like a patriarchy or conservative or any of these other nonsense terms. Guys like this guy who was brought up in the institutions, he's walking into a minefield. These heroic young men who've done nothing wrong but work against a system that's stacked against them, they're headed into this society. All I can do is pray for them. Oh my God. Thank you, everyone.